And then I wanted to highlight an example of a resource that's available through the Inflation Reduction Act. So HUD received about $85 million to develop a energy and water benchmarking initiative that will provide HUD-funded energy and water monitoring services to eligible properties for up to 4 years. The building owners that are eligible to receive this assistance are owners that receive HUD rental assistance through the Section 8 project-based, Section 202, Section 811 programs. Um, Importantly, you do not need to receive a GRRP award to participate in this initiative. And the services provided will include providing access to an energy consultant who will support the benchmarking process, including contacting utilities to get access to data, as well as once that data is analyzed, providing recommendations to the owner for portfolio-wide cost and energy savings upgrades. This initiative has not launched yet. HUD is still in the process of building it out. But I wanted to share the link here, which provides an opportunity for you to sign up for alerts to get the latest information and to be on the priority list to learn when the initiative does launch. Next slide. So before we go into the presentations, we wanted to kind of get a sense from the group, what is the main barrier to benchmarking energy consumption that you all have encountered? So Madeline will launch the poll. Is it cost? Is it lack of understanding of how to benchmark and limited staff capacity, difficulty accessing energy usage data, which we know is definitely a challenge in certain parts of the country? If you can access utility data, is one of the challenges. The quality of the data is not what it should be, or maybe you're new to benchmarking and you're not quite sure yet. But would love to have folks fill out this poll, which will help kind of guide our discussion through the rest of the session. And while we're waiting for responses, I will put into the chat the information for signing up for the HUD benchmarking initiative.
I'll give it another 5 seconds.
All right, so it looks like 34% of folks are new to this topic, which is great because you'll get a lot of useful information from this session. The main challenge is accessing energy usage data, which is certainly not a surprise, followed by lack of staff capacity to dedicate to benchmarking. So all of the challenges are got votes for all of the challenges. So I'll now turn it over to our first speaker, who is going to tell us how to solve all those problems, right? Marty. Introduce Marty Jostin. She's the Principal Director for Building Decarbonization at New Ecology, where she works on the design and implementation of building energy monitoring and optimization services and other operations focused multifamily building services. And for those of you who are part of our building owner bootcamp, and then you know well New Ecology, which is our technical assistance provider for that work. So with that, I will turn it over to Marty.
Thank you, Ned. I need to update my bio, but no worries there. I have a fair amount of experience doing benchmarking for our clients' buildings kind of back in the day. And I also have experience in developing a benchmarking tool. So that's kind of what I'm bringing to this conversation. Having said that, I haven't done that direct work in a while, and we have not been involved with that benchmarking company for a while. So my information is possibly a little bit old. And I'm really hoping that in the Q&A, some of you with more current information and ideas and experiences can certainly contribute to the effort. So don't be shy. Madeline, you want to So first of all, for those that don't know about benchmarking, real simple. What it is, you're comparing a subject building, sometimes a portfolio, but I'm going to just talk about a building, to an appropriate benchmark. Now, it's great to use the word benchmark when defining benchmarking. But what I mean by an appropriate benchmark is something that connects those properties. And with buildings, it's always been that they have the same type of use, right? You want to compare multifamily buildings to multifamily buildings, not to a mix of buildings that include manufacturing and office and houses of worship and the like, right? That's pretty obvious. And then the climate, because the use of those buildings, aside from this, how they use energy, or the ways they use energy is how they use it based on the climate, right? We've got heating climates, cooling climates, et cetera. So those are definitely kind of core across any platform, key attributes of a benchmarking effort. The other suitable characteristics depend on that building use, and it changes by building use. So for instance, in multifamily, EPA, the portfolio manager tool that many of you are aware of, they talk about things in terms of the building height, right? And their program for awarding Energy Star certification to buildings relates, low, mid, and high rise. So there's some aspect of the building use that needs to be applied to each building benchmarking effort. Like high rises, they're going to have elevators, they're going to have more pumping energy. There's reason to make those distinctions. And then other suitable characteristics depends on your purpose. So, and I'll get into that a little bit. So you advance the slide. So again, back to EPA portfolio manager. That's kind of the standard that everyone knows. It was originally created to create a score for a building, right? We wanted to give building owners the right kind of incentives, carrots, to do the right thing, to think about and care about their building energy use, and then to be rewarded with a score that let them put a plaque on their building, right? That let them talk about their building publicly and their company as a leader. Let them, when they're marketing to people that are going to rent or buy the property, they could, point to this. Portfolio manager also has attracted a lot of people because they created the Better Buildings Challenge. And that's been this great group that's networked and shared stories and information. It's provided access to government officials and utilities that's sometimes hard to come by. So it's been a real carrot so far in how it's been used. And then it's been more recently kind of appropriated by the building performance standards community as a way to measure compliance. So it's kind of turned into a little bit more of a stick, which is okay. It's still a carrot. It's now being used also as a stick. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. An example. So New Ecology's main office is in Boston, and we have a building performance standard known as BERDO. It stands for the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. A lot easier to say BERDO. It takes building use. This is the kind of the core of it, where it's, assigns each property a building use and then a schedule that lays out at what points in time they have to meet a certain metric. This metric is kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square foot. So it's like the greenhouse gas emissions on a square foot basis for a given building use. And in Massachusetts, the end goal is 0. We're trying to be net zero by 2015. So it lays out that schedule, and you can see what those numbers are for multifamily housing. You can see how they go down. This is more or less, these building performance standards follow this type of a protocol or type of a schedule, and they all require the use of EPA's portfolio manager as their the place where the data goes and where the reporting is generated from. Next slide. And nope, that's not the next. There's supposed to be one with a graph. There we go. I must have had them out of order. Sorry. So here's sort of a visual of what that BERDO compliance schedule looks like over time for multifamily housing. If you recall on the table, it started at 4.1, it went to 2.4. This green line shows that step down of those targets over time. The blue columns show building emissions. So this is an actual project that we're working on. The column all the way to the left gives you the building emissions for that current project in 2023. And that slight slope you see at the top is giving the emissions of that project some credit for the grid itself getting cleaner over time. So as the electric grid moves away from fossil fuels, starts adding solar, sourcing solar, sourcing hydro, it itself is decarbonizing, and those benefits, accrue to all the buildings that draw from that grid. But otherwise, if this property does nothing, it's in tough shape, right? Everything above that green line represents work they have to do to comply with this ordinance, and really kind of opportunity to improve the building for the residents and to tap into some very good incentives available now. All right, let's speed this up quickly. The map that you just showed, I don't want to be so Boston focused. I will throw into the chat the link for this. This is the Institute of Market Transformation showing where these ordinances exist. This map's only going to get more colorful. So if you're on this call now and you don't have some type of building performance standard, it's probably coming to a place near you soon enough. So I just wanted to, I'll connect you to that resource in the chat later. Okay. EPA is great. The portfolio manager is great for these carrots and stick things. The other part of what you need to be able to do sometimes with benchmarking is really know, I know that I'm not in compliance. What do I do? So that's where other benchmarking tools like WeGoWise that we helped create, and there are certainly others, come into play. Can you advance? So we can just kind of run through these. So in this case, I had talked about building characteristics before and how EPA portfolio manager kind of talked about building height. What we did with WeGo is we just threw a whole bunch of other characteristics in there that we thought had relevance to how a building used energy, to their performance. And then we married that with the same raw utility data that portfolio manager used. And continue. We were able to do things. This is just a few examples, right? If you have all your buildings in a tool like this and you are able to compare them to one another in a very visual way like this, it's huge. It helps you quickly see and identify in different ways, what are my worst buildings? Where do I need to be focusing my efforts? How did a building move from this quadrant to that quadrant? So things like that. So it's helpful on that quick visual, big picture front. Next. It also helps you identify and quantify anomalies. Again, could be like a standard report that a tool would give you, and it would let you see quite quickly that something strange happened here. This is a water consumption report. All of those values are high, quite honestly, but the one that's really out of whack is clear and visual. And if you want, you can download the data from a report like this and quantify the cost of that, of missing that to your organization. That has some value. Next. And then custom benchmarks. Having all of those different types of characteristics lets you do different combinations of things to come up with different benchmarks that might just resonate with you in different ways. Your senior properties where you did X versus Y, things of that nature. What this shows is simply a benchmark. That low curvy line at the bottom represents all of the green certified buildings that are in that database, and then how this owner's buildings compare to that. So gives someone thought, right? Maybe I should be going after some green certifications in my work. So there's lots of different ways that you can slice and dice the characteristics to produce custom benchmarks. Continue. I'm running out of time. Quickly, additional benefits a tool is that you've got all your data at your fingertips. It's available for service providers like New Ecology to easily access, the folks that do utility allowances, tenant education. It gives you widespread access to your information in a very organized way that others in the organization can tap into, and you're all looking at the same thing. And then to me, there's so much turnover in facility staff in our properties that having that historic information affords the ability to look back over time and understand what might have happened in a building to a new facility staff person. Next. Obviously, there's challenges. You named some at the beginning. This is a job. It's not trivial to get this set up. It's not trivial to do the work I just described, to pay attention to it from an operational standpoint. It requires maintenance to keep it current. It requires dedicated staff in some cases. So there's a cost to that. Quality control. You can't control what other users are putting into the platform. So that can be problematic. And then we've already talked about utility data being an issue. It's been an issue since we started developing WeGo 15 years ago, and it's still an issue. Next, almost done. So just some quick best practice type ideas, right? If you decide to invest in the effort of really using a benchmarking tool to manage your building, then, go all in, create some standards, have internal trainings, divide and conquer the tasks. Maybe that makes it less costly for any one division. Quality control. The biggest thing here is just don't combine your characteristics in such a small way that you got a very small benchmark you're comparing your buildings to. It's better to have big groups of buildings that have do away with the kind of errant data points that might exist. And then there are different opportunities to address utility data. I think getting tenant releases signed at lease up is a very smart thing to do for a lot of reasons. And then I've listed some other things here as well. But still, these are still challenges. I don't mean to dumb them down. I just wanted to end on a slightly more positive note. So that's all I have. I think I've hit the time. Really looking forward to hearing what you all have to contribute to the conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Marty. So we'll have time for folks to ask questions in a few minutes, but feel free to continue to add them to the chat. Now we are going to hear from Michael, our sustainability program manager, who will walk us through NHT's recent portfolio benchmarking and some of the lessons learned from that.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So we can head over to the next slide. I just want to underline sort of a few of Marty's points. Really, this does take some time. It does take some quality control. Those are, important points to keep in mind. Marty mentioned WeGoWise, which is New Ecology developed a while ago. It's now been, I believe, sold to Measurable, is its current sort of branding. There's other similar providers that collect your utility bills, aggregate them together in sort of a platform with different dashboards. Marty showed some of the images of what WeGoWise looks like. And then those providers can also report that data into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So there's also Bright Power. Marty just added sort of the energy scorecards created by Bright Power. And then Yardi Energy is also another provider that I know some peer organizations have used as well. And as Marty mentioned, she showed that map, the very colorful map of states and local jurisdictions that are adding different benchmarking or building performance requirements. One of the key considerations there is as those come into place, you want to take a look at early on what requirements those programs have. In some cases, we need to reorganize our existing utility benchmarking data to align with the requirements of that program and reorganize. So that's something that you really want to ask questions, call, email to make sure you understand kind of the requirements of reporting once you understand that, reconfigure, fix those data issues. But you might want to send in one early report, because I've always gotten questions back from that jurisdiction. If everyone could please mute, I just hear some background noise. So I've always gotten questions to those reports, and in some cases they've asked me to sort of report in a way that I don't think makes the most sense. It's a bit inaccurate, but it's how they wanted that data reported, and it's really a request from their end to make it easier for them to review. Next slide, please. So Marty mentioned some of the metrics. I personally like using these two. Marty mentioned sort of that Boston performance requirement that's using the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Greenhouse gas emissions intensity. So emissions divided by the square footage of that building during a year. And so you'll see on this slide down below, we give a range for our DC communities of currently 2.5 to 4.5. So we would be in trouble soon for some of our communities. And greenhouse gas emissions are a whole other animal that you need to take into account, various different things that are kind of beyond the scope of this conversation. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, program and jurisdiction specific. I'm a big fan of using the site energy use intensity as a metric. It's fuel neutral, and that allows us to really look at buildings just based on the energy that's used in the building itself. Not some other metrics that kind of can skew that depending on like how much gas versus electricity is used in the building. And the other thing that I'm doing as well is I'm adjusting, you'll notice at the end of sort of the metrics that I provide for our DC communities, I'm adjusting for worst case 100% occupancy, because in our data, we do see a range of buildings at different occupancies that do impact and make some buildings look a little bit rosier on energy performance than others. So I do like to adjust for bringing all of them up to 100% occupancy so that we can compare apples to apples. Next slide, please. One of the, from a quality control perspective, one of the items that has the biggest impact on our portfolio's performance is making sure that our gross floor area, so the total square footage of the building, is accurate. And so you'll see in these slides are heavy, so you can refer to the slides when they're available on the website to dig in a little bit further. But you want to go to the definition within the glossary of what gross floor area is. But it allows you to go all the way to the exterior surface of the building. And that's important because that's all the way to the exterior surface is the farthest point that sort of you'll be consuming energy. And so it's really the full envelope of the building in the enclosed space. And by reviewing this and adjusting, correcting it, we've been able to increase the GFA for some of our communities by 20% or more. And that's essentially improving the energy efficiency of our buildings by 20% or more. By increasing square footage or increasing the metric at which buildings are evaluated on. It's energy use divided by square footage. So this is key because all your buildings in Energy Stop Portfolio Manager are evaluated against buildings that have had this quality control, have been evaluated and the GFA confirmed. So I have a quick kind of quality control sort of process. A quick recommendation if you want to take a look at this in a quick QC and easy one. Add up your residential square footage and add some additional space there, and then some ways that you can potentially fix this if you need to. Next slide. And then sort of some deeper level items that you might run across on some of your buildings and to consider. Um, One is if you have on-site renewable electricity systems, so either solar, electric, or wind turbines. There's some affordable housing buildings with wind turbines. That has to be reported into Energy Star Portfolio Manager a little bit differently. And so that's something to make sure to look out for and make sure that you're doing correctly. Because if you're not taking account, properly accounting for the energy that's exported away from the building and kind of sold to your electric utility, you're not getting the full benefit of the system. And Energy Star Portfolio Manager is actually thinking that you're now consuming all of it and using a little more energy than you would otherwise be, than what you actually are. So that if you have that situation, you want to take a look at that webpage from Portfolio Manager, take a look at that issue. And then one below, Portfolio Manager has a number of resources on how to find utilities to report data directly into Portfolio Manager. I've had a situation where utility that doesn't allow that, trying to find a contact of the utility. The only resource that I could find, even Google didn't work, was this old HUD resource, and I found that useful. Again, it's a last resort, but if there's no other way that you can find the contact, that's been a resource for me. So we'll switch over to some questions. Take a look at what's come in the chat. And
thanks, Michael.
Sure.
I do see we have one question. I think it's from Marty with the map that you showed on one of your previous slides. Just some clarification about what exactly is required for the cities or areas that have the color circle, and then what triggers these requirements to do benchmarking, and how it might relate to the federal programs.
Well, so as far as the map goes, I certainly don't know what's required across the country in terms of all of those benchmarking programs. So there should be information locally in your jurisdiction, or the link that I posted also has, there's a backup detailed listing to everything you see on this map and probably other maps that they have posted that kind of defines what those requirements are. More often than not, they require you to have buildings of a certain size in Portfolio Manager, and that you report, you export, I think their data verification report, that you report a number or provide a report. And in the case of Boston, you have to have it verified by a third party, someone that says, yep, this is good information, it's accurate, so that they can measure you against whatever standard that's applied. And in many cases, and increasingly, if you don't meet the standard, there are fines and other actions like that involved. So those local ordinances are in place. And I don't know of any state laws, actually. States have goals of, like Massachusetts, net zero by 50, but then the localities are creating these ordinances and these programs. There's 3 in the state of Massachusetts. So that's the source of the information and the requirements for that. They're all trying to get you to whatever that state goal is. And then the other, let me see the rest of your question.
It was my question. It was about what triggers it. So what triggers having to participate in that? How do you know if you have to do it?
If you have a building that meets whatever that ordinance's criteria is. So example, again, Massachusetts, we have an ordinance that covers all the buildings in Massachusetts that for multifamily, I think at this point, it's down to 15 plus unit size buildings. Sometimes it's like, commercial buildings that are 30,000 square feet and above. So there's usually it starts with the big buildings and then comes down over time. At least that's what happened in Mass. And all of that is in the ordinance. So you really have to read your local ordinance to understand exactly what gets triggered when. the folks within the city that run that program proactively, they've got the database of all these buildings, and they're proactively contacting businesses saying, hey, you're coming up, you owe us this, etc. So they are actively managing that list and those expectations.
So just to quickly add, on this map, the orange is benchmarking, so utility reporting. The purple is beyond that, so it depends. And like Marty mentioned, the size is the size of the building, the GFA, is typically the threshold, and then the metrics that it's evaluated on depends. For instance, Washington, D.C., for their building energy performance standard, is based on the Energy Star score, but that's most likely to change to a different metric. Maryland is introducing a building energy performance standard for all buildings above 35,000 square feet. And then there's another question that came in EPA portfolio manager, which commodities are required to benchmark in order to meet the federal programs? Which commodities are required to benchmark to receive a building rating, not a certification? So portfolio manager, it's all energy use of every type. So that would even include, it could potentially include, generators. But I mean, it would be electricity, gas, water, and the building rating you might be referring to an Energy Star score. That's provided by the platform portfolio manager. I believe HUD, if that's what the question is related to, they'll require a statement of energy, I believe it's called, which is a little bit different process. It's kind of scope of work than the Energy Star existing building certification, which is taking that Energy Star score, having someone verified, an independent party verified, and provide you with Energy Star existing building certification if your Energy Star score is above a certain level. In Minnesota, the statewide requirement is for projects that are pursuing funds for Minnesota Housing Consolidated RFP. But the cities listed in Minnesota have requirements based on square footage. Yeah, as this map shows, you might have different requirements that vary from what the local jurisdiction requires for benchmarking or building energy performance standards. So the scope might be different. And the triggers for kind of reporting or benchmarking or a performance limit, as Marty mentioned, in Boston has a performance limit on greenhouse gas emissions in that case. Other states do it differently. That will vary. Oh, sure, it was in the question, but yeah, absolutely. The Minnesota point wasn't a question, but sort of highlighting sort of variability between requirements. That's a great point.
Yeah, and to Todd's earlier point, maybe the requirements in your state or in your city are different, but to receive some of the federal funding through the IRA, they might have their own requirements. So it's just looking into that information if you are pursuing one of those funding opportunities. Any other questions for Michael or Marty? If you don't have any right now, you can always email me after this and I can make sure we get answers sent over to folks. Awesome. So now we're going to hear from Ian, who is going to walk us through SAFE's multifamily portfolio carbon emissions calculator. The calculator allows multifamily portfolio owners to calculate their annual greenhouse gas emission and CO2 equivalent. And it was created to help multifamily portfolio owners understand their carbon emission baseline based on the actual and estimated data, providing them with the first step in measuring carbon reductions. So Ian, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Great. This one. Thank you for that introduction, Madeline. And I really appreciate Marty and Michael kind of setting the stage for the use case surrounding our tool. So like Madeline said, this is the SAFE Carbon Emissions Calculator. It's kind of the first of two tools that SAFE developed and released. The second is called the SAFE Carbon Roadmap. And like Madeline said as well, the Safe Carbon Emissions Calculator is kind of used to help calculate your baseline and annual year-over-year carbon emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And then the purpose of the Carbon Roadmap is kind of a follow-up tool to help track those year-over-year emissions and help set decarbonization and energy efficiency targets and implement different strategies in achieving your goals. But today I'll just be going over the Safe Carbon Emissions Calculator and going through a quick overview of it. So of course, this is an example template of the tool. You can find it on our website. We also have a blank version where you can download it for free. And like Madeline said, it's designed for multifamily owners. We don't recommend you using it if you own commercial properties or other types of properties. It was really designed for multifamily in mind. So when you first open the tool, you'll see the introduction tab. This gives some helpful definitions and instructions on how to use the tool. For the data that we use and require to do the calculations, we have a data entry flowchart. If you are a Energy Star portfolio manager tool, it's very convenient for you. For the tool, we built out a carbon emissions template that you can access by clicking the link here. And it'll automatically generate a template in your Energy Star portfolio manager that has all the different data fields that we require for the tool. And basically all you have to do then is select the properties that you want to be included in your calculation, as well as the time period, and you can quickly download it again for free off of your Energy Star portfolio manager. I just also want to say we have more detailed instructions as well as video guides and webinars on our website. So if you're interested in learning more both about the calculator and roadmap, you can click the link down here and it'll take you to our website. To get actually started in the tool, I'm going to skip these two tabs here and start at the whole building data tab. This is where you're going to begin with entering data that's going to be calculated. So you're going to scroll down to this table down here, and I really want to break it out into two sections. This gray section over here is kind of all calculated data that's based on the information that you enter on the right here. So you won't be, there is a little bit of customization that you can do over here, but for the most part, it's to kind of show the information that you've provided over here and kind of give you just a quick overview of what your portfolio looks like or what your property data looks like. With these columns over here, this is directly information that can be directly copied from that Energy Star template. So once you download the template with your information, the properties that you've selected in it, it'll kind of look similar to this with the same column names, and you can directly copy and paste that data into here to begin your calculations. So this is just some general information that would be used in a carbon emissions calculation, like the property location, the number of units, the size, the energy and natural gas consumption, any renewable energy information, and other data points such as that. Where you can start to do a little bit of customization with the tool is that when you enter this information, the calculator does a quick check on your EUI. This is your energy use intensity. And basically what this is checking is the performance of your property, right? If it's performing at a level that we suspect is kind of too efficient or not efficient enough for the property that you've entered, we kind of do a quick flag to tell you that we suspect that the information that you entered might be incorrect. And this is because, we've recognized that there are challenges not just with accessing data in the first place, but also making sure that that data is accurate and correct. So even if you are able to get your data into Energy Star Portfolio Manager, it sometimes happens where that data might not be correct. So we do check that for you. And basically after a property is flagged, it'll say fail here. You then have the option to include it in your calculation as a whole building, or you can move it over to the incomplete data tab, and it will be estimated based on our benchmarks that we have built into the tool. So for example, with this property called DC Apartments, if I know, for example, that the data is correct in Energy Star, maybe it's a newer property, maybe it's something like Passive House where I know that it's going to perform better than most other properties like it, I can still include it in this calculation by using this dropdown to select keep, and it'll be calculated as a whole building data. But maybe with these other properties, such as Missouri Apartments or New Hampshire Apartments, I'm not sure that the data is correct. Maybe, if you look at the EUI, it's performing way more efficient than it's supposed to be. So maybe I know that the data isn't correct, and I want to have the estimated baselines applied to it when I calculate its emissions. So that brings me to the next tab, which is the incomplete data tab. This is where you're going to first enter properties where you know that the information isn't correct. So say, you have a set of properties in your Energy Star portfolio manager that do have energy and water and natural gas consumption information, but maybe you have some other properties where you don't have any of that information. This is the really unique part of this tool, is that we have built-in baselines that can calculate an estimated carbon emissions for properties based on some simple characteristics of a property, such as the location, the size of the property, whether it's all electric or not, and some other commonly, identifiable parts of a property that you should be able to have on hand. And it will calculate again estimated carbon emissions for your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And then at the bottom, there's another table here called the automatic transfer table. This is just showing the properties that you entered into your whole building data tab that you chose to have a incomplete data calculation applied to it. So again, if I go back here with these Missouri and New Hampshire apartments, I selected move. They then show up here. And now I know that when I'm doing my scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, these are going to be treated as incomplete data properties, and it will have the same estimated calculations applied to them as with these properties. We then have other tabs built into the tool that allow you to enter additional information to apply to your overall portfolio calculation. So if, say, for example, you store your renewable energy assets separately from your overall portfolio information and it's not tracked in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, we provide the opportunity to still include those assets in your portfolio's calculation. So if you track that information separately, you can enter it here. You can say what kind of asset it is, and then it will still be included in your overall portfolio's calculation. We also allow you to do that for other sources of direct emissions. So say, for example, you have fleet vehicles on site at some properties that you want to track the fuel that they're burning and include it in your portfolio's carbon emissions. You can totally do that again. You can select the type of fuel, the unit of measurement, and the fuel quantity, and it will still contribute towards your portfolio's overall carbon emissions. And that goes well with indirect emissions. So if you have other sources of energy and water consumption, again, you want to include that in your portfolio's overall emissions, you can enter that here, and it'll contribute to, again, that overall portfolio level consumption. So going back to those two tabs that I skipped at the beginning, the first here is the portfolio summary tab. This provides basically, after you've entered in all of your information, it provides basically all the data points that you're going to be looking for, right? You have your scope 1 direct carbon emissions, you have your scope 2 carbon emissions, as well as your GHG emissions intensity. And then it breaks it down a little bit more by fuel type and the versus scope 2 emissions, as well as the calculated scope 1 and scope 2 emissions based on whether you had whole building data or incomplete data. It's all here to kind of help you just get a high level overview of what your portfolio looks like. And the last tab here is the Safe Roadmap tab. This kind of aggregates all of the information you've entered and puts it in one location. It's called Safe Roadmap because this is the tab that you're going to use if you choose to use the Safe Carbon Roadmap to import this data into that tool. Basically, it aggregates both the properties that you had whole building data on and the properties that you didn't have whole building data on and puts it in one location for you. It again shows that total scope 1 and scope 2 emissions here, and it allows you to just do like a simple copy and paste into our other tool if you choose to use that as well. That's all there is to this tool. I know I went through it very quickly. I highly recommend that if you're interested in learning more about the tool, again, there's a link inside it here that you can use to go to our website. I can also drop our website in the chat if you're interested in going there and learning for yourself. We have lots of webinars and instruction guides there that can really help you get started with it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to present today.
Thanks, Ian. We have some time for questions for Ian if anyone wants to either come off mute or put them in the chat. And while folks are typing, I will also put a link for the calculator in the chat.
So I'll just add this SAFE tool. We used it to set our greenhouse gas emissions baseline for when we joined the Better Climate Challenge. And the key benefit of it is when you have buildings where you don't have whole building data, either utility doesn't offer it, or it's kind of very difficult to get even to create a sample of your resident data, to create that whole building sort of data set, so that you have whole building electricity, gas, and all the other kind of utilities that are actually consumed. Without having that whole building data, you can't get to a greenhouse gas emissions intensity or a total amount for that building without that whole building data. But this tool, using their incomplete data tool or tab, allows you to, even if you have minimal information about the building, just the general characteristics, size, number of bedrooms, and some other, it's less than 15, I think, fields, you can get the estimated greenhouse gas emissions of that building using this tool. And it's using a data set from Bright Power, the kind of as part of the development team for SAFE. It's using their database of multifamily buildings from across the country, line that up with the characteristics of your building that has that incomplete data, doesn't have whole building data, and can give you the estimated greenhouse gas emissions for that building. So that's a great tool to use if like our portfolio, there's some buildings where we still have incomplete data. We don't have whole building data. We use that to sort of estimate greenhouse gas emissions for those specific buildings. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Michael, any other questions before we wrap up?
I just have a follow-up question to that. I'm just wondering if generating whole building data by those means is acceptable as an input in a tool like Portfolio Manager.
So no. I mean, this wouldn't be for Portfolio Manager reporting. This would be for getting that estimated greenhouse gas emissions, either by using the 15 fields that it asked for, or it actually does take, as Ian mentioned, if the property is flagged because it doesn't have whole building data, has incomplete data, it will also estimate greenhouse gas emissions using the energy performance that you are reporting. But yeah, this would be separate, just looking at greenhouse gas emissions for the building itself. Of course, the most accurate data would be reporting a whole building data into Portfolio Manager, or if you can't get whole building data, get a sample of resident electricity use and extrapolate that to the entire building as HUD allows and has specific guidelines for.
Right, exactly what Michael was saying. It's not going to replace that kind of benchmarking work that you're going to need to do on your properties. It's really just a helpful tool to help track at the portfolio level what your portfolio looks like in terms of carbon emissions. And like Michael says, well, while we do use this database that's over 12,000 properties from Bright Power, the most accurate data is going to be reported directly from your property, and it's not going to replace that ultimately.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Marty, Michael, and Ian for this. This was super helpful. We'll just quickly wrap up with our upcoming sessions. So all of our developers should have received invites for our cohort sessions with New Ecology. They're listed on the screen here. Beginning the 15th of November, we'll be meeting for about an hour and a half for New Ecology to do, to kind of walk through the preliminary scopes of work and talk about common themes for developers in the region. Later this month, our HFAs will be meeting to talk about how they can integrate IRA funding with programs at their agency. If there's any specific questions or topics you want discussed, please let us know. And then in December, we'll be having a session for developers where we will take the items from the scopes of work and connect them to funding opportunities through the IRA. And then in December, again, we'll be meeting with HFA to go over DOE rebates and talk through how you can further work with your state energy offices to design programs that support affordable housing. Any other last minute comments or questions from folks? And then materials from this week's session or today's session should be ready by end of week. So I know we talked about a lot of technical terms. So if there's any questions or you want links to any of the resources mentioned, please let us know. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.